Hello there and welcome to Rod's Ramblings, a podcast reminiscing about cultural events and how they affected a 60-something. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to everyone that listened to my first episode and those friends that gave me feedback. It really is appreciated. Have you ever had one of those experiences where you find something from your past and things that you haven't thought about for years come flooding back? Well, I had one the other day and I'd like to share it with you now in this episode. I was sorting through a few things in the spare room and I came across a box of singles which I'd completely forgotten about. After talking about my vinyl collection in the last episode, this was quite a coincidence. There were singles by the Beatles, the Stones, T-Rex, the Jam and Spandau Ballet, but the one that stood out for me was Standing in the Road by Blackfoot Sue. It took me back to my school days and the associated memories came flooding back. Blackfoot Sue were a four-piece band, two of whom were David and Tom Farmer, twin brothers who lived down the road from me when the record was released. I can remember all the kids in the area were talking about the band, the single, and the possibilities of stardom that would be passed on to us all through some sort of musical osmosis. There was also speculation that the Farmer boys had been to our school. This wasn't true as they grew up in Birmingham, Kingshurst I think, but even so, my friends and I were excited to have pop stars in our midst. The band achieved what we all thought was the greatest thing possible when they appeared on Top of the Pops in August 1972. As these memories came flooding back to me as I worked my way through the box of singles, I could remember episodes of Top of the Pops with Rod Stewart and the Faces kicking a football around while singing Maggie May as John Peel sat on the side of the stage playing the mandolin. Another episode where the BBC accidentally showed a picture of the darts player Jockey Wilson on the back of the stage as Dexys Midnight Runners played Jackie Wilson said, but to be honest I couldn't remember Blackfoot Sue's performance. In order to aid my memory, I went to the good old internet for assistance and found the itinerary for the August Top of the Pops show, and I was very impressed with what I found. The show featured Layla by Derek and the Dominoes being played over the chart rundown. There was a video of Procol Harum playing Conquistador, a song which would have associations for a future holiday of mine. Perhaps that's a story for a future podcast. Accompanying Blackfoot Sue in the studio were Electric Light Orchestra playing 10538 Overture, Lindsay DePaul singing Sugar Me, Duncan Brown singing Journey, Rod Stewart wearing it well, and Alice Cooper celebrating the end of school at number 1. Pants people danced to Jackie Wilson's I Get the Sweetest Feeling, and the show closed with the camera panning around the audience as Mardi Gras sang Too Busy Thinking About My Baby. Presenter of the show, as it was for many shows in the 70s, was Jimmy Savile. The less said about him the better. Getting back to that August night, 10538 Overture was the Electric Light Orchestra's first single since Roy Wood, Jeff Lynne and Bev Bevan had formed the band as a side project from The Move. I really liked The Move. I'd heard Blackberry Way on the radio and their most recent hit, California Man, had caused me a certain amount of embarrassment when Mrs. Price from next door had walked into the garden as I was playing a passionate rendition of the solo on an imaginary saxophone. 5 years earlier, Flowers in the Rain had been the first record to be played on Radio 1 when the station was launched, but it also brought controversy when the Move's manager, Tony Secunda, produced a cartoon postcard depicting the then Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, in bed with his secretary, Marcia Williams. Wilson sued the band and won, forcing the Move to pay costs and all royalties from the single. Jeff Lynne had joined Roy Wood and Bev Bevan in 1970 and contributed material for two of the Move's albums, Looking On and Message from the Country, the album which contained California Man. Lynne had always had an interest in classical music, and a big factor in him joining Wood and Bevan was Wood's interest in forming a band mixing rock and classical music. In an interview at the time, Bev Bevan stated that the only reason Jeff Lynne had ever joined the Move was to form a new band. He was never interested in being part of the Move. It was just a good money-earning band that subsidised the beginning of ELO. In the following clip, Jeff can be heard talking about the collaboration.
Well, it came from me and Roy Wood meeting up in, clubs in Birmingham, nightclubs, when I was in the Idol race, to discuss having strings in a group. I'd never heard a group with strings, really, and then we'd talk about it, we'd meet up at night after we'd done shows or whatever, and then talk about this group with strings. And it was really difficult because there were no pickups then for the cellos or the violin, and you used to have to use microphones, which used to feed back all the time. So it was real rough. And anyway, Roy left after about I don't know, a couple of months. We made one album, and then he left a little while after that. And that was how it all became that. And, of course, then suddenly we discovered they got pickups for these instruments. So I started putting them on, and the sound got better, but it was still pretty rough because it was such a sparse group. It was only 7 people trying to make an orchestra, because on the record I'd used like a 30 or 40 piece orchestra, string section. And of course, on stage, when you got 2 cellos and a violin and a mellotron and a Wurlitzer, that's it. That's trying to make an orchestra, It's not easy.
At the time, the combination of rock and classical music was quite revolutionary. My only experience of anything similar was Deep Purple's Concerto for Group and Orchestra and Procol Harum's concert with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra. It was a style that would prove to be very successful. ELO would go on to have 27 top 40 singles in the UK and 15 top 20 hits in America. Funnily enough, they would also hold the record for the most Billboard Hot 100 top 40 hits, 20, without actually ever achieving a number 1 single. One of these hits was Mr. Blue Sky, which was released in January 1978 and reached number 6 in the UK and number 35 in the US. Those of you that are aware of my footballing allegiance will know that my favourite use of the song is when it's played at the beginning of Birmingham City matches at St Andrews as the players walk out onto the pitch. So, back to Top of the Pops, and number 1 was Alice Cooper singing probably his most famous hit, School's Out. Alice, whose real name was Vince Fernier, had developed quite a reputation for being a supposedly scary character carrying out quite terrifying antics on stage. In the following clip, he describes how he developed that reputation.
We scared the PTA, we scared, the moral majority, we scared everybody when we first came out, because it was 1970. There was nothing like Alice Cooper, and there were snakes and guillotines and blood, and nobody knew where we stood on anything.
These antics quickly came to the attention of Mary Whitehouse, whose protestations boosted Alice's popularity.
We used to send her flowers, and she could not understand why we were sending her flowers. And Leo Absey,
yes,
we'd be sending cigars, saying, "Thank you, please try to get us banned here." They never understood the negative publicity worked so well for us.
Not everyone thought of the band in the same way as Mrs. Whitehouse. In fact, the stage show was complemented by a couple of very famous people from the world of art and entertainment.
The great thing was that we were all art students. So Salvador Dali was our first big crush. He was our hero. To work with Salvador Dali, he actually came to see one of our shows, and he went, "It's surrealism." Groucho Marx saw the show and said, "It's vaudeville." So everybody had a different take on what the show was. He saw it as surrealism, so he picked me to be the model for this hologram. And then he comes in one day with this plastic brain. He says, "This is the Alice Cooper brain." And, of course, it had a chocolate eclair running down the back, and there's ants crawling all over it that spell out Alice and Dolly. And I went, "That's great." I said, "Can I have it?" And he goes, "Of course not. It's worth millions."
The single School's Out would rocket Alice Cooper's career and would become one of those anti-education anthems alongside Pink Floyd's Leave Those Kids Alone. In the next clip, Alice is talking about the emotions he wanted to capture when he made the record.
I wanted that jubilation of it's the last day of school, we have 3 months off for vacation. If you can capture that last 3 minutes in the classroom of the last day of school, and then, it's like the exuberance and the jubilation of knowing that you don't have to wake up the next morning and go to school. I said, if we can capture that on a song, it'll be an anthem forever.
As you may be aware, the first album I owned was given to me as a birthday present from my brother. But the first one that I actually bought was from a record shop on Cape Hill in Smelly. The owner of the shop ran a savings club where you could make weekly contributions, looking longingly at the newly released records until you'd saved enough to buy a single, or if you could wait a little bit longer, an LP. I'd saved enough to buy an album, and had cut down my options to either Roxy Music's debut album or Love It to Death by Alice Cooper. Bob Harris had described Roxy Music as a triumph of style over substance. However, I'm sure this didn't affect my choice. I think it was more likely to have been the picture of Alice Cooper's eyes with the spider makeup that was his trademark on the inside of the gatefold sleeve, along with that image that he developed over the years. Thanks to the good old internet, I was able to find a clip of Blackfoot Sue performing on that night back in 1972, and something that made me smile was the clothes, those worn by the band, and more importantly, those worn by the audience. In the interests of personal safety, just in case my niece Hannah is listening, I must point out that not all audience members at Top of the Pops recordings wore amusing clothing, especially not those watching Craig Davey. For all my mockery, I must confess that I'm not totally innocent when it comes to crimes against fashion during the 70s. I used to go out wearing platform shoes, 4-button waistband bell-bottom trousers and a cheesecloth shirt with a Ronson lighter in the one breast pocket and 20 Embassy No. 1 in the other. I thought I was the dog's What's-Its. It was more like the dog's dinner. So to close, Top of the Pops must be the longest running music programme, having been broadcast for over 42 years between 1964 and 2006. For the pub quizzes out there, the first individual artist to appear was Dusty Springfield singing I Only Want to Be With You, and the Rolling Stones were the first band singing I Wanna Be Your Man, which incidentally was one of the singles I found in that box. The show finished in 2006 with the last band appearing being Snow Patrol performing Chasing Cars. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my ramblings about Blackfoot Sue's 3 minutes and 42 seconds of fame, and look forward to sharing time with you again on the next episode of Rod's Ramblings. In the meantime, cheers and take care.